We'll go ahead and, well, I can't help that. Anybody else left? Come hither. Did you just say hither? Yeah. Is that a word? What? Do what? Don't name your next child that. Next child. No. Mike said, I said, come hither. And Mike said, don't name your next child that. And I said, next child. Huh?
I know a guy who's got $4.
Nah, man. Nah. Yeah, nah. Yeah. All right. So, as we move into this will be the final session of the evening, and then we'll break and come back tomorrow. Notice, real quick, I guess I made Olean mad. Olean got upset. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know where he is, but notice kind of the tactic that I used when I found myself in a pickle. Olean asked me.
Your ambiguity or your evasiveness? Which one?
Both of those. Notice, really, when I found myself in a pickle, what I do? I just turn the question back on the other person, right? Olean said, "Hey, how do you know that Washington wrote anything? And I said, "Well, how many things did Jesus write?" Right? Is that an answer?
No.
That's not answering the question, right? That's not answering the question. And so be mindful of that. Olean did a very good job, and Daryl did a good job too, of holding my feet to the fire, so to speak, with regards to method or, well, hey, how do you know that? Olean a couple of times said, give me the sources, right? Give me the sources. Anybody, I don't know if is it okay if people have seen Jerry Maguire, that movie? Remember the famous line from Jerry Maguire? Show me the money, right? Well, when you're talking to somebody and they make a claim, show me the sources, right? Make sure that you do that. I just wanted to run that by you. But here, really in this next session, what we're going to look at is the current trend of Christianity, the current trend of skepticism, so to speak. That would include people who identify themselves as having no religious affiliation, agnostic, atheist, things like that. And unfortunately, this right here is what's happening. What is that? That's a church building falling apart. That's what's happening in the West. We were just talking about it earlier. If you look at Western Europe, pretty much secularized, pretty much a non-religious, which is unfortunate because it has such an extensive, both positive and negative history with regards to religion, and more specifically Christianity. But this is what's happening here at home, specifically with your children and your grandchildren, that age bracket. That's what's taking place. And so the question I want to ask, and I want us to think about, is the one that's on the screen. Are we preparing the next generation? This is from David Kinnaman's book back in 2010. It's starting to get a little dated. But it said 1 in 10 youth ministers are having classes related to faith and science. 1 in 10. Now, I'm no math major. Never claimed to be, am not very good at math. But I know that 1 in 10 is not a very good number. So we see the secularization of the West. We see skepticism starting to creep in. And the question is, and it's not just on the youth minister. Don't hear me say that. Right? But it's a good measuring stick for how concerned maybe or how focused people who profess Christianity are when it comes to matters of faith and science. In the second piece, that's from Michael Lipka from the Pew Research Group. This is from 2015. Nuns, those are people who have no religious affiliation. 36% of nuns are those born after 1996. I think there are a few of them in here that are born after 1996, right? So like I said, that's kids, that's grandparents, right? Yes, sir.
When I was, my last duty station was at Lack Air Force Base down in San Antonio. One of the trends that we saw new recruits coming in the Air Force, that many of them had this affiliation, but also there were quite a few that were affiliated with Wicca, which is basically witchcraft.
Yeah.
Some white witchcraft. They had a gathering around on a given.
Yeah, I don't specifically know the stats on Wicca, but that's a very interesting observation with regards to that. So 36% of the people that make up the group called nuns, those with no religious affiliation, are born after 1996. Most adults now say it is not necessary to believe in God to be moral and have good values. That's 56%. That's up from about half, 49%, who expressed this view in 2011. 56% of adults in America say it's not necessary to believe in God to be moral and have good values. All right, you don't have to read this. You probably can't read it. It's on the screen. But I'll read a section of it since it's on this nice big screen right here. It says here, if the world is at a religious precipice, then we've been moving slowly towards it for decades. 50 years ago, Time asked the famous headline, "Is God dead?" The magazine wondered whether religion was relevant to modern life in the post-atomic age when communism was spreading and science was explaining more and more about the natural world than ever before. We're still asking the same question, but the response isn't limited to yes or no. A chunk of the population born after the article in Time was printed, whoa, okay, that just got a lot bigger, was printed, may respond to the provocative question with, God who? God who? Not, hey, has God lost his focus or his influence, yes or no? But who's God? You see the difference in that? That's what, hello. I was just role-playing. All right. Right here is a global perspective on religion. Now, you see all that purple on the map right there. That is the second largest religious group by country. And the purple are nuns. North America, Canada, Mexico. The whole Western Hemisphere. The second largest group. Agnostics and atheists. Look at Europe. Even, here's the surprising thing for me. Look at Africa. I mean, Africa, the gospel in a lot of places is booming. But you still have this influx of an area where, hey, those who are agnostic or atheist, they make up the second largest religious group, right? Look at Australia. No surprise there. Or look at South America as well. So this was surprising to me. I never thought in a million years that nuns would be the second largest religious group or religious category in this many countries. I figured America, right? I figured Western Europe, but I didn't think countries in Africa. I didn't think South America. Didn't even really think Australia. So that's something also that's very telling. I'll read the thing on the left here. It says, more than half the people on the planet call themselves Christians or Muslims, making their faith the largest in at least 200 countries. Looking beyond the majority, however, reveals patterns of belief indicative of former connection and future development. So the second largest religious group, it goes nuns, Christianity, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, and then something I can't even pronounce, ethno-religionists, local tribal religions, and then other. So that's also very telling. So question is, are we preparing the next generation? The share of Americans who identify as atheists has doubled since 1950. No, since 2007. Just over a decade. The number of people who say that they are an atheist has doubled in this country.
Is there an age designation of that number that has changed? It's got to be younger.
It's younger.
That's scary.
It's younger. Barna shows that. Pew Research shows that. That it's younger. It's definitely the younger group. Hello? Stop messing with me, Brett. No. Here it is. The percentage of teens, Generation Z, who identify as atheists is double that of the general population. 13% to 6% of all adults. That's Barna. Yeah, that look right there. 20 years ago, 18% of skeptics were under the age of 30. Today, the percentage is nearly double at 34%. Killing me. I'm like trying to adjust. I feel like I'm being attacked by the screen. But yeah, it's definitely a younger group. And so the thing on my left, your right, is the cause of what's going on my right, your left.
But isn't there, have so many of these mega churches now that is taking a lot of the 20s and 30s heroes? Are they falling away? I know that's...
Every mainline denomination is in decline. Every one of them. Catholics are the most. There's a mass exodus at the Catholic Church, for sure. For obviously reasons that I can't say on camera, but also because of some of the things that we've talked about in the first session.
This is our opportunity to really jump on board.
Absolutely. So, what's happened? So, here are the stats. This is what's going on. So, what's happened? There's a strapping young man right there in that picture over there. That's me, by the way, in Iraq. And here's the thing. We're fighting a battle. This is my personal belief. Brett, just let it ride, brother. Just let it ride. We're fighting a battle that we aren't prepared for. Is the problem. See, the battle, and this is just my opinion, the battles that we used to fight were over things like doctrine. Hey, which doctrine's correct? Baptism, sinner's prayer, organization of the church, women's role, things like that. That's what a lot of young people used to have conversations with. You could go down the street with a Baptist or a Methodist or a Catholic, and the discussion wasn't, does God exist? It's, okay, well, let's look at the Bible and see what the Bible says about this issue. It was immediately accepted as divine, inerrant, inspired, the truth. Now the battle's over issues like the existence of God, the reliability of Scripture, Old Testament ethics that we didn't get into in the first session, problems with the Trinity, religious pluralism, all these things. And in large part, what the stats say, not anything that I've said, what the stats say is people who profess Christianity aren't prepared. They don't know how to handle that. One of the questions I wish I could have asked and I didn't ask was, who here believes that God is one? Who here believes that the Father is God? By a show of hands, who believes the Father is God? Who believes the Son is God? Who believes the Spirit's God? Now, Aaron would have said, 1 in 3. Right? That's a logical inconsistency. I mean, who, on average, knows, and this is a rhetorical question, has an answer for that? Most people that profess Christianity, I'm not saying anybody in here, but most people who profess Christianity don't have an answer for something like that. So, what has to change? We need to infuse apologetics into the home, classes, sermons, camps. And like I said before, it can't just be an event on the calendar. Like I said, I appreciate the invite. More than glad to be here. But here's my point to us right here and for the people that are going to be here tomorrow. If this is it, if this is the only exposure that we give ourselves, our kids and our grandkids to defending our faith on the arguments that we're going to look at, I might get a little bit. Think about it in Bible study, right? If you only expose yourself to Bible study on Wednesday and Sunday, or even if you just expose yourself to Bible study on Sunday morning, it's like eating once a week. If you only eat once a week, how strong are you really going to be? Same thing with this, right? All right. So we've got to start training. This is a picture from Paris Island, South Carolina. This is actually the book that they give you after you get your Eagle, Globe, and Anchor. And that right there is the final Crucible March, when you're dog tired, and they say, "Hey, 7 miles, let's roll." 60-pound pack. I miss those days. Not at all. So what do we have to do to help this situation? First, we've got to gain the knowledge and the experience, right? I hope that the first session, I hope that sticks with you for as long as you live. And I hope that you build off of that experience, whether that was good or whether that was bad. But we have to expose ourselves to the arguments for the Christian faith. I firmly believe that the arguments and the evidence for the Christian faith, as Daryl had mentioned, the historical evidence, my personal opinion, historical evidence for the resurrection is just as good as Caesar crossing the Rubicon. It is. If you use the same standard of historical investigation, it is. The question that we have to ask is, am I going to take the time and am I going to feel the need, the weight of that, to actually go and look for it? I got to gain the knowledge and the experience. And then after that, I've got to impart that information to my kids, to my grandkids, to people in the youth group, to people that are my age. I mean, just in a simple conversation, just say, "Hey, you know what? I was reading Lee Strobel the other day, and he said something really interesting. What do you think about that?" Usually the answer is going to be, "I've never heard anything like that before. Where can I get that?" Hey, there's this thing called Amazon. It's amazing. Hillary kills me for it, right? Because I've already got books for next semester. She's like, "Next semester," right? Impart the information. Okay, and then make application. It's one thing to say, "Here's the Kalam cosmological argument." Why in the world is that important? Here's why it's important. A, B, C, and D. This is why it impacts, and this is why it should impact your relationship with God. So then we make application. But then here's something else. See, all this 1, 2, and 3, that's teaching. That's not training. See, it's not really training until I get into a situation, a controlled situation, right? So before we went to Iraq, they didn't just say, "Hey, you're going to Iraq," and then the next day put us on a C-130 and fly us over to Fallujah. What did we do? We did workups. We said, "All right, here's some mount operations, city operations. This is what it's going to look like." And so they initially scare the mess out of you with all that stuff so that when it happens, you know what to do. See, what we've done is we've told a lot of young people that the Bible's inherently is inspired, that there's no errors, and then we toss them onto the battlefield of the academic college campus without any training. And you know what happens? They get blown up. And then it's their family that's got to catch the shrapnel and the weight of that. And so here's an idea. This is something that a good mentor of mine from Biola does every year. He teaches one class a year at a local high school. And every year, because they're in California, he takes that group to Berkeley. UC Berkeley. If you've never heard of it, it is the bastion of liberal thought. And you know what they do? They either go around and they ask questions of students, or they have a well-known skeptic come and talk to them. Now, for us in the church, we're like, oh, that's not role-playing. That's real life. But, you know what they do? Once they have that situation, they debrief. They say, all right, you went out and you asked these questions. All right, you went out and you had this conversation with this skeptical professor. What'd you think? How that impacts you? What questions really kind of bothered you? All right, now let's go back and look at why that's a good objection, but also, what's the Christian answer to that? You see the difference between the knowledge acquisition and the training. See the difference between that. And we shouldn't be scared of that. It's so interesting to me, and I know I'm speaking my opinion here, but it's so interesting to me that Christians so often, and we pride ourselves in doing it, and we should. We go around and we say, well, you know what? We've got the truth. And it's the only truth. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the what? Yeah. And nobody comes to the Father except through me. And then we get into a situation where we're talking with somebody who doesn't believe him, and like, I can't tell the truth. Let the preacher handle that, right? Google William Lane Craig and then come back to me. All right. Because we haven't trained. If we've got the truth, which we do, by the way, firmly believe that with all my heart, there's not an argument that can come against it that will be able to hold. Once again, the question is, are we willing to do the investigation? Are we willing to do the work? All right.
And we must be, our thinking must be disturbed enough to cause us to dig.
Yeah.
As long as we are satisfied with the status quo, we won't think anything.
No, I agree with you. And the reason why I always lead out, and this isn't about me, but the reason why I always lead out with the first session the way that I did is because I want people to be disturbed. I want people to be shaken a little bit. Because I know in the time that we're going to spend, even if it's just for a weekend, it's going to be a controlled environment. We can handle that stuff. But if it doesn't shake you to the point where you want to move, then there's nothing I can do. Go ahead.
It's too easy. What we've done is we've innocently become arrogant. Does that make sense? And then we'll just say, I believe the Bible, and I don't have to prove it.
There you go. I believe it.
And that'll work with your friends.
Yeah, it'll work with your friends.
With your family somewhat, but you get into a real world situation that you're talking with.
Yeah.
In a college environment or
and here, I think that's a good segue before we move into this right here. When you ask, here are the number one answers I get when I'm Aaron and I ask somebody, hey, why do you believe what you believe? That's the way I was raised. Right? Mom and Dad told me it was true, got to be true. Right? Grew up in the church, had an experience. When I was, 16, had a religious experience, and I just kind of knew in my heart that God was real. Now, let me ask you this question. I'm going to do another quick role play. Imagine, obviously you guys are the Christians, and I'm a Mormon. And you come to me and say, why do you believe what you believe? Grew up that way. Had a religious experience. I just know in my heart that it's true. What would your response to that be? Seriously, what would it be? Mike, if I told you that as a Mormon, what would your response be?
Well, you're wrong.
You're wrong.
And I go to the Bible.
And then you go to the Bible. Okay, now why am I wrong? Why am I wrong? Why is that a bad answer? Why is what I said a bad answer? Because that's the way that I was raised, because I had an experience, because I always grew up Mormon. Why is that a bad answer? Why are those three bad answers, huh? Okay.
It's not fact-based.
It's not fact-based. Okay, now let's say I was a Muslim. And I was talking to you, I said, hey, you asked me, why are you a Muslim? It's the way I was raised. I had an experience. I always grew up going to mosque to worship on Friday. Same answers hold, right? That you gave for the Mormon? Now, you're the skeptic and I'm the Christian. You asked me, why do I believe what I believe? I always grew up that way. I had a religious experience. I always went to church. Now, if the Mormons' answer and the Muslims' answer are bad answers, which is what you said, not me, why do they work for us? Why do they work for us? Just because we're Christian? So here's my point. If our initial answers, if the majority of people who are Christian have the same answer as the Muslim or the Mormon or anybody else in a different religion, don't we need better answers? Shouldn't we have better answers? Absolutely. And one of the reasons why we fail to pursue those answers is because some of the stuff that's on the screen right now. Don't you need a PhD for this stuff? I'll just let you in on a little deal here. I don't have a PhD. I don't. What if someone asks a question I don't have an answer for? It's okay to say I don't know. What was one of the first things I said as Aaron? I'm glad to be here, and I might not have an answer for everything that you say, but I'm going to do my best. What's wrong with that? Don't get trapped in thinking that you're going to or have to have an answer right there on the spot for every question that's asked. If anything, turn that into another engagement at some other time. Yeah. That's a really good question that you've raised. I don't have an answer for you right now, but in 2 weeks, a week, can we meet back and discuss that question? That's a Bible study. That's apologetics and evangelism all wrapped up into one. Right? Maybe one of the questions that we lead out with is, hey, what do you think happens when you die? That right there gives you an indication of somebody's worldview, because there are really only two answers. There's an eternity, or you're just going to be buried 6 feet under. Right? So another thing is, maybe one of the reasons why we don't pursue the answers to these questions is because we just don't know where to find resources. There you go. There are some right there. Shameless self-promotion time, right? But reasonablefaith.org, great site. William Lane Craig will probably go down as the greatest theistic philosopher of all time. And I say that because I had atonement class with him last semester. No, just kidding. Obviously, that's one of the reasons why we do what we do with our site. But just some quick resources here as far as books. If you're a book person, you can go to our website, A Reasonable Faith, which is by William Lane Craig, for videos if you're that kind of person. Case for Christ, Lee Strobel. Like I said, Lee Strobel can tell a story, and he's got a great story as far as how he got to where he is. If you don't know, Lee Strobel used to work for the Chicago Sun. If you've seen the movie Case for Christ, you kind of know a little insight about that. Was an atheist, and then did a side project while working at the Chicago Sun. Calls up all these people and says, hey, looks at the case for the resurrection of Jesus. We recently, last year, put out a book. It's 81 pages, deals with 5 arguments, called Meet Aaron the Atheist. And it's kind of very similar to what we did in the first session. Each section, each chapter, I write from the position of Aaron. And I lay out the case against the New Testament, against God's existence, deal with some of the things that we're going to deal with, tomorrow. Aaron addressed, some of the things that Aaron addressed are in the book. So if you're like, man, that whole thing about the New Testament, Jack's going to mention that. What about the whole thing about Jesus didn't write anything? That, I don't know if Jack's going to mention that. If he doesn't mention it, it's in the book. Jack, you better mention it. Not just kidding. Other areas that you can go, there's obviously Another good source, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, update by Josh and Sean McDowell. Is amazing. I would strongly suggest, here are my top three, all right? Reasonable Faith by William Lane Craig. Evidence That Demands a Verdict by Josh and Sean McDowell, and Meet Aaron the Atheist, just because I'm a part of the group. No, just kidding. But that's also a decent resource. But the third one would be Case for Christ by Lee Strobel. Great introductory for that stuff. So we've got about 15 minutes left. So if there's anything in this session, or anything that you want to talk about from the first session, or anything that you want to ask about Apologia Institute, go ahead, throw those my way, and then after we get done with that, we'll go ahead and be dismissed for the good stuff. Anything? First session. Yes, sir.
You said something pretty much when we first started about Asian religions having similar beliefs of the resurrection.
Yes.
I'm totally unfamiliar with that. What are those?
Okay, so that's a good question. So Aaron said in the first, sometimes I feel like I'm schizophrenic, right? I get multiple. So basically what was said is Aaron said, hey, the story of Christianity is a lot like ancient Near East religions. And this is a claim that comes up very frequently, maybe not in the academic classroom as much, but more like out there on the internet. And so what the skeptic wants to claim is that the stories of like Horus, Osiris, Mithra, all those are old, ancient Near East and even Gilgamesh epic. They're ancient Near East religious movements that they say are just like or very similar or parallel to the Christian religion, and that the Christian religion adopted those things and infused them into their movement, and that's how it became popular. The answer to that question, and Jack, are you covering this tomorrow or no?
No, but it's in the book.
Okay, it is in the book, but I'll answer it just to save you a chapter. Very well, you're catching on. Very good.
My chapter.
There you go. It's your chapter. Tough break. No, I'm kidding. So the answer to that is this: is number one, when it comes to Osiris, which is one of the more popular ones, looks nothing like the Jesus story. Osiris is betrayed by his brother. His brother chops him into 14 pieces, spreads them across the world, and then his wife, Osiris' wife, who happens to be his sister, goes around and collects 13 of the pieces, puts them together, and he returns, kills his brother, and then takes his place as the ruler of the underworld. Now, sound anything like Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Not a chance. Right?
Connected to agricultural.
Yeah, and that's the other point, is that a lot of these ancient Near East religions aren't dealing with the sin issue of mankind. They're dealing with the agricultural cycle. So the rising and dying, ironically, tends to be in flux with the season, so to speak. And so anytime you hear something like that, what I would simply ask is, okay, well, what's the story of that person? What's the story of that ancient god, right? And the other fact is there's no historical evidence that Osiris was an actual person. It's kind of a big deal, right? There's no evidence that Horus was an actual person. There's no evidence that Mithra was an actual person. So this is just kind of pop skepticism that's out there on the internet. But we need to be aware of it, because it definitely, you're definitely going to hear that as well. So, does that answer your question? Okay. Anything else? Ba-na-na-na-na-na. I got to bring that at some point.
You know, not all Christians were raised in Christ either. Not all Christians today were brought up in a Christian home.
That's true. That's also true. Not all Christians were raised in a Christian home. Anything else? All right. Well, if there is nothing else, thank you so much for being here tonight. I just want to let you know that it's a